Hello! Back in the old days, a man nicknamed Mr. Six kept the streets of Beijing in fear. He single-handedly dealt with dozens of enemies and assembled a gang of loyal henchmen around him. The now-retired gangster is very offended when people around him call him an old man, but it's high time for him to admit that his days of power are long gone. The old gangsters have been replaced by outlaws who race through the streets in expensive cars and don't give a damn about respecting their elders. But when they kidnap Mr. Six's son, the father can't stay away and calls to round up the old gang. A motorcyclist moves slowly down a noisy street, searching for his prey. He steals a wallet from a drunk guy, takes the money out, and throws the rest into the trash. A stranger notices this and insists that the pickpocket return the ID card to the owner, as it is extremely difficult to reissue. At first, the thief doesn't understand why he should listen to the strange man, but after taking a closer look at who is standing in front of him, he decides to follow his advice. Nobody wants to have issues with the former mobster nicknamed Mr. Six. Although the man is in his 50s, he is highly respected in the neighborhood and can solve any problem. He lives with his bird, Bo, who can pronounce its owner's alias. One morning, he comes out of the house and greets his old acquaintances. Suddenly, one of them, street vendor Chow, is surrounded by the police, who try to confiscate his cart. The man has no license to trade, but he desperately resists the officers and pushes one of them. The policeman does not tolerate the humiliation and retaliates by smacking his elderly opponent. Mr. Six intervenes and uses his reputation to stop the conflict. He respects the law on licenses, so he asks Chow to peacefully hand over the cart. But the officers are also unhappy that the man damaged the police car when he was being apprehended, and they want to issue a fine so that they don't disturb his old friend anymore. Mr. Six pays the amount out of his own pocket. As the cop prepares to leave, however, he reminds them that his acquaintance has been unfairly humiliated and wants the young cop to get hit in the face as well. The crowd of onlookers cheers on, eager to see it. The situation gets heated, but Mr. Six only wants to scare the cops so that they don't get too drunk with power. He asks them to refrain from violence from now on.
老实人给挤得急了，也不定怎么着。
The sergeant is unhappy with this public admonition, but does not dare fight back. To the hooting of the crowd, the cops scramble away. The next day, Mr. Six helps his pal build a new cart, and the salesman asks about Bobby, his friend's son, who disappeared 6 months ago. Chow is worried that something might have happened to the boy, but Mr. Six acts as if he doesn't care about his son's fate. He doesn't want to stoop to looking for him in the back alleys. However, once he is alone, the man rushes to answer every phone call, hoping to get at least some news from his son. But it turns out that it's the police calling. Another friend of his, nicknamed Scrapper, is in jail, and a bail is required to get him out. The hero visits a bar run by his old acquaintance, Hua. After a brief moment of romance, the man borrows some money from her and goes to the police station to free his friend. Scrapper thanks his boss and tells him that he recently gave Bobby a ride home to his new place. Mr. Six asks for the address, and the next day, goes to his son's place with a box of food. However, at the place, he is greeted by the boy's neighbor, who tells him that Bobby was beaten up a few days ago and then kidnapped. His friend secretly filmed the people who came to get the boy, so he shows the video to the guest.
你们不是朋友吗？他都让人给弄走了，你还跟没事似的跟这儿玩游戏。
The father realizes that the two young men live independently and do not interfere in each other's business. He can no longer stay away and finds other acquaintances of Bobby, who explain that the boy has recently had an affair. But the girl turned out to be taken. She was dating the leader of a gang of street racers, Chris. He was the one who attacked Bobby, and in response to the beating, the guy scratched Chris's Ferrari. Now they want money from him to pay for the repairs, and threaten to break his legs if he doesn't. Mr. Six uses all his connections to find out as much as he can about the gang. Eventually, he finds the phone number of one of Chris's henchmen and introduces himself as a courier to meet him. Mr. Six gets into the kid's car and puts a noose around his neck. The kid is forced to reveal that Chris will be racing through the city streets this evening and agrees to take the man there. The car joins the traffic and connects to the frequency of the street racers over the radio. Mr. Six manages to make contact with Chris, but the old man has a bad tolerance for high speeds and sharp turns, so he feels nauseous. The driver stops the car to let the passenger get a breath of fresh air. Chris, who has been following them in his sports car, stops in front of Mr. Six. The gangsters of the old and new worlds give each other long stares, and then the kid hits the gas, dashing away from the cops chasing after him. The henchman gets away too, leaving the old man to the cops, who wonder why Mr. Six decided to get into street racing. In the morning, he gathers his companions, who advise him to go to the police.
现在什么时代？您那套不灵了，别小栽没处引来大祸。
Violent scrappers suggest that they kill Chris, but Mr. Six doesn't like this idea either. He believes that his son is to blame for a lot of this and takes time to think about it. The man goes alone to the garage where Chris's gang hangs out. The young thug orders to bring Bobby. As soon as the boy sees his father, he immediately tells him to mind his own business and gets a kick in the gut in return. The sweet family reunion scene amuses the involuntary spectators. The man demands an explanation from his son, who confesses to everything. Having confirmed that the gangster is serving mobster justice, Mr. Six gives Chris 2,000 yuan to repair his car, telling him to keep the change. But this generous gesture only provokes an explosion of laughter. The racer demonstrates the scratch on the door of the Ferrari and declares that he needs at least 100,000. Mr. Six agrees to the terms, but asks for 3 days to get the money. One of the gangsters is rude to the man and threatens him, using foul language.
到了可伤你自己。
The young man takes this as a threat and slaps the old man in the face. In the old days, he would have ripped the offender's head off on the spot, but now Mr. Six shows unprecedented self-control. He calmly promises not to get the cops involved and walks away. The man gathers his friends again, and Hua tells them that the racers are the offspring of very wealthy parents, and that by pulling the right strings, Chris's father even covered up the murder his son had committed. Mr. Six still wants to settle things peacefully and visits everyone he knows to raise 100 grand, but the retired gangsters are working low-paying jobs and can't help. To one of them, Mr. Six even gives some of his own money to pay for the medicine for the guy's seriously ill wife. Eventually, the hero manages to find a former member of his gang who has made a business out of selling fireworks. The businessman can only spend very little time on talking to him, and this hurts Mr. Six's feelings. In response, the man puts a large sum of money on the table, but the guest does not touch it.
你要这样以后咱就别见。
六哥，差不多行了。
He leaves, as he sees that his friend has been changed by success and doesn't want to feed his arrogance. Outside, Mr. Six sees a crowd of onlookers observing a man who is about to jump off a balcony. He hates the youth's complete lack of empathy and tries to shame the onlookers, who have gathered as if to watch a reality show. As usual, very few of them listen to the senior. After taking just a few steps, the man suddenly drops to his knees and grabs his chest. He is brought to the hospital, where the doctors insist on urgent heart surgery. But Mr. Six is not yet finished with his affairs, as he has only raised 20,000 and refuses to be hospitalized. He is about to sell his house, but Hua meets him on his way out and gives him the missing 80,000. The woman demands only one thing in return, that her friend take care of his health immediately after his son is saved. The next day, Hua finds a bundle of title documents to Mr. Six's property. He knew the woman would refuse, but he couldn't just take the money without offering something in return. Meanwhile, Mr. Six and Scrapper go to meet Chris, but all they find in his garage is Chow, who has secretly started painting the Ferrari. That's his way of trying to help, but the hero immediately realizes that this is unlikely to please Chris. Although Chow has been repairing cars for 20 years, he makes the situation much worse, and 100,000 won't cover the new damage. Chris's insolent henchman starts yelling at Mr. Six again, and the man runs out of patience. With his trademark finger grip, he makes the young man squirm in agony.
我就接着抽你，替你爹妈教训你，这叫规矩。
As the gang try to liberate their friend and grab rebars, Scrapper throws off his jacket and pulls out his blades, tossing one to Chow. Chris approaches Mr. Six and offers to resolve the conflict. Since there's definitely not enough money for the full paint job on the Ferrari, good old-fashioned violence is all that's left. Chow talks about the rules of the Beijing mafia squabbles. In a week, the two gangs will take as many people as they want and meet at an abandoned lake. If the racers lose, they will give Bobby up and demand no money for repairs. Mr. Six and Scrapper put the word out, hoping to bring the old gang together, but no one responds. And Hua again tries to convince her friend to report to the police, but this goes against all of the man's principles, and he plans to go all the way for the sake of honor. Suddenly, Hua receives a call and goes outside, where she sees Bobby and one of Chris's racers in a car. The girl hands over the bag of money that Mr. Six has been collecting to repair the Ferrari and sets Bobby free. Inside the bag is a mysterious letter, which Hua puts aside, and the man doesn't notice it. The father immediately handcuffs his son in the house, despite his protests. Hua intervenes in their altercation and promises to keep an eye on Bobby. They talk about the past and how the son has hardly seen his father since his mother's death. In addition, he has no respect for the man's criminal past. Hua explains that things are different now, and his father is respected for his ability to negotiate and take care of his friends. Plus, he mortgaged his house to get his son out, so they have to stick together. Bobby decides to give his father a chance, and they gather around the table. They argue about old and new world principles, but when it comes to Bobby's mother, they almost get into a fight. The man refrains from hitting his son, and the boy talks about how much his father missed while he was in jail and engaged in gang violence.
知道我妈大冬天被人撞了，躺他妈医院走廊什么样吗？
Bobby succeeds in wringing a tear from the man, and the man wants to get down on his knees to apologize. His son stops him, and they finally bury the hatchet. Bobby plans to open his own bar, and his father wants to support him in his endeavor. They joke around, and the hero manages to find the right words to say how he feels.
我其实就是想看着你，好好给我找一媳妇儿。
But alcohol has a bad effect on the man, and his heart fails again. He is taken to the hospital, where Mr. Six again refuses surgery. His businessman friend visits the hospital to pay all the expenses, and leaves before the man can refuse the money. Together with Bobby, the patient escapes from the hospital, and Hua tries unsuccessfully to bring them back. But once home, the man sees that someone has invaded the place and turned everything upside down. The scoundrels have even killed his favorite bird, Bo. Mr. Six buries the pet, having suspicions about who did it. On the way home, he and Bobby are stopped by Chris's men, who demand that Mr. Six give back the stolen letter. The man genuinely doesn't understand what they're talking about, but the goons don't believe him and start beating him up. Bobby, who was sent to get help, hears his father's screams and goes back for him alone. The guy gets hit in the head with a rebar, and his injuries turn out to be even more serious than his father's. He slips into a coma. Meanwhile, Scrapper decides to take revenge on the racers. He and his men smash up Chris's garage, but no one is inside, and even the cars have been moved. Mr. Six shows up at the scene and asks his friend to stop.
我就操他妈！咱他妈什么时候受过这个呀？
The protagonist says that he greatly appreciates his old friend, but their conversation is interrupted by a phone call. The caller explains to him very clearly where the letter was, and that it must be returned urgently. This time, it's Chris who is being held against his will for having lost an important document. Mr. Six rushes home and finds the letter in a trash can. It turns out to be a statement from Chris's Swiss bank account. It contains nearly 8 million euros, which his father apparently got through corruption, and which he plans to launder through his son. Chris sends a henchman to get Mr. Six, and promises to pay generously for the return of the letter. The boy's father has already kidnapped several men, and threatens his son with reprisals. The man refuses to accept the millions.
明白，六爷。没碰上您之前，我以为这样都是书里写的。
They will decide the matter by fighting, as they originally agreed. Only now, the winner will also take the account statement. Mr. Six also demands that the bastard who killed his bird participate in the fight, in spite of all the disagreements. The men show respect for each other and shake hands at parting. Mr. Six returns home and sends a letter to the prosecutor's office with the bank statement. To his friends, he says nothing about what has happened, but they manage to find out that the boss plans to go out against the racers alone. Scrapper and Hua decide to do whatever it takes to round up the old gang, and inform them that the man has cancer to make sure they show up for the last meeting with the leader. The unsuspecting Mr. Six takes care of his son and writes farewell letters. On the appointed day, the man gets on his bicycle and sees that his neighbor's pet, a giant ostrich, has escaped from its cage and is fleeing down the road from the cops. This sight greatly boosts his morale. The man appears on the lake with a samurai sword at his side. He steps out onto the icy surface and summons his enemies with a battle cry. Chris's men are perplexed as to why no one else has shown up, but soon, a crowd appears behind Mr. Six.
约架就说约架呗，说他妈什么哎呀你！
你丫怎么不早说呀？
All the old men are ready to stand up for their boss, but for now, they humbly await his orders. Mr. Six is touched by this gesture, but goes into battle alone, not wanting to cause any trouble to his friends. Scrapper can't stand it and leads the others. Mr. Six runs forward until his heart finally gives out and he falls in the middle of the lake. But his comrades in arms avenge their brother, who has always inspired them by his example. They pay for it with various injuries and a brief arrest, but it was certainly worth it. Bobby has fully recovered and opened a bar where he keeps a new talking bird in memory of his dad. Chris's father was arrested for corruption, thanks to physical evidence and an anonymous letter. As always, look for the name of the movie in the video description. In the meantime, let us know in the comments. Do you think there can be any principles of honor and dignity in the criminal world at all? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so that more awesome stories come out as often as possible.